The alarm clock screamed with the same monotonous digital shriek that had torn me from sleep for the past 3 years. 6 a.m. The numbers glowed a hateful red in the perpetual semi-darkness of my studio apartment. My hand slapped the snooze button with a practiced, weary motion. 10 more minutes. It was a small, daily rebellion against a life that felt like it was on a relentless, predetermined loop. My name is Jake Miller. And at 28, I was pretty sure I was living a ghost's life, haunting the spaces between my apartment, the subway, and a cubicle that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and desperation. I was a data coordinator for a mid-level marketing firm, a title that sounded vaguely important but essentially meant I was a digital janitor, cleaning up spreadsheets and making sure numbers in one column matched numbers in another. It was soul-crushingly boring, but it paid the bills for my minuscule apartment in a building that seemed to sigh with collective resignation. The 10 minutes evaporated in a blink, and the alarm started its shrieking again. This time, I swung my legs out of bed, the cold floorboards a familiar shock to my system. The routine began. Shower, dress in one of 3 nearly identical gray button-downs and a pair of khakis, choke down a piece of toast, and gulp cheap coffee that tasted like bitter water. Every movement was automatic, performed by a version of me that was running on a script written by some unseen, unimaginative director. Outside, the city was waking up, but it was a grumpy, congested awakening. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and the distant promise of rain. I joined the river of people flowing towards the subway station, a current of grim faces and downcast eyes. We were a legion of the unfulfilled, marching to the beat of someone else's drum. I felt a familiar hollow ache in my chest, a feeling I'd come to think of as my constant companion. It was a yearning for something more, something that mattered. I just had no idea what that something was. The workday unfolded with a numbing predictability. My cubicle neighbor, Brenda, was already on her 3rd phone call, her voice a nasally drone complaining about a client's unreasonable demand for actual results. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly greenish glow on everything. My screen flickered with endless rows of data. I'd tried to explain the feeling to my girlfriend, Sarah, a few times. "It's just a job, Jake," she'd say, not unkindly. "It funds your life. Your real life is out here." But that was the problem. I didn't have a real life out there. My life outside of work was just waiting for work to be over. Sarah was great, smart, beautiful, with a career in graphic design that she seemed to genuinely enjoy. We'd been together for 2 years, and on paper, we were perfect. But lately, a quiet distance had been growing between us. I think she could feel the emptiness in me, the void I couldn't articulate. She'd suggest things, weekend trips, cooking classes, gallery openings, and I'd agree, but my participation felt like a performance. I was going through the motions with her, too, and the guilt of that was a heavy stone in my gut. Lunch was a sad sandwich at my desk while scrolling through social media, a curated highlight reel of other people's apparently thrilling existences. Vacations, engagements, promotions, artisanal sourdough starters. My own feed was barren. What would I post? Day 1097 of existential dread. The vending machine ate my dollar. Hashtag living the dream. The afternoon dragged on, minute by excruciating minute. At 4:55 p.m., the familiar Friday afternoon energy began to buzz through the office. A palpable sense of relief, of imminent escape. For everyone else, the weekend was a brightly wrapped gift. For me, it was just 48 hours of trying to figure out what to do with myself before the loop started again. Finally, 5:30 p.m. The great exodus began. I shut down my computer, the screen blinking into blackness, and felt a small, fleeting sense of release. Maybe this weekend would be different. Maybe I'd find that elusive something. The subway ride home was even more crowded than the morning commute, a pressurized can of human exhaustion. I was jammed against the door, my face inches from the grimy glass, watching the dark tunnels whip by. I could see my own reflection, pale, tired, a stranger with my eyes. The hollowness in my chest seemed to expand, making it hard to breathe. This was it. This was my life. A slow, quiet sinking. I got off at my stop and trudged up the stairs to the street. The promised rain had arrived, a cold, insistent drizzle that soaked through my jacket. Perfect. Just perfect. I pulled my collar up and began the 3-block walk to my apartment, head down, shoulders hunched against the weather and the world. That's when something unexpected happened. I was passing the mouth of a narrow alley between a laundromat and a shuttered bodega. It was a place I passed every single day, twice a day, and I never gave it a second glance. It was just a repository for overflowing dumpsters and the faint smell of decay. But today, a flicker of movement and a soft, pathetic sound caught my attention. It was a sound that didn't belong to the city's usual soundtrack of sirens and traffic. I stopped, peered into the gloom, curled up against the damp brick wall, shivering under a soggy cardboard box that was doing a poor job as a roof, was a dog. It wasn't just any dog. It was the most wretched, pitiful creature I had ever seen. It was a medium-sized mutt, maybe some shepherd and lab mix, but it was so emaciated its ribs stood out like a wicker basket under its dirty, matted fur. One of its back legs was held at an awkward angle, clearly injured. Its eyes, huge and brown, looked up at me, not with fear, but with a quiet, profound resignation. It was a look that mirrored exactly what I felt inside. It let out that soft sound again, not a whine, not a bark, but a sigh of pure, unadulterated defeat. Our eyes locked. Time seemed to slow down. The rain, the traffic, the distant hum of the city, it all faded into a muffled background roar. In that moment, it was just me and this broken animal in a filthy alley. The hollow ache in my chest didn't just pang, it screamed. It was a physical pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards this creature. My first thought, the one programmed by years of city-living cynicism, was to keep walking. It's not your problem. Animal control, shelters, someone else. I even took a half step forward, intending to do just that. But I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the wet pavement. I looked into those eyes again and saw a soul as lost as my own. The carefully constructed walls I'd built around my own feelings, the numbness I cultivated to get through the days, it all crumbled in an instant. This was real. This suffering was immediate and undeniable. "Hey," I said, my voice a rough croak I barely recognized. "Hey, buddy." The dog flinched but didn't try to run. It didn't have the energy. It just watched me. I slowly crouched down, keeping my distance, not wanting to scare it. I clicked my tongue softly. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." I looked at its injured leg, at the way its whole body shivered from the cold and wet. This was insane. What was I doing? I lived in a 400 square foot apartment that didn't allow pets. I had a relationship that felt fragile. I could barely take care of myself. I had no money for a vet, no food, no supplies. Every logical, practical part of my brain was shouting at me to walk away. But my heart, a organ I'd largely ignored for years, was shouting louder. "All right," I whispered, more to myself than to the dog. "All right." I took off my soaked suit jacket. Moving with a slowness I didn't know I possessed, I approached the dog. It tensed but remained still, those huge brown eyes tracking my every move. I could smell it now, a feral, unwashed scent, mixed with the metallic tang of old blood. "This might be a bad idea for both of us," I murmured, as I gently draped my jacket over its trembling back. "But we're gonna try, okay?" I slid my hands under its body, careful to avoid the injured leg. It was shockingly light, all skin and bone. It didn't struggle, it simply went limp in my arms, a total surrender. As I lifted it, it let out another soft sigh, this one sounding different. Not of defeat, but of relief. Holding the shivering, filthy animal against my chest, my expensive work shirt be damned, I stood up and walked out of the alley. I was no longer just Jake Miller, the data coordinator. I was a man carrying a broken dog in the rain, and my life had irrevocably changed direction. The walk back to my apartment building was surreal. I got a few stares, but in New York, you learn to mind your own business. The dog was quiet in my arms, its head tucked against my shoulder. I could feel the frantic, bird-like beat of its heart against my own. Getting through the lobby was the first hurdle. My super, Frank, a perpetually suspicious man, was mopping the floor. He stopped and stared, his mop hovering midair. "Miller, what in the hell you got there?" "Found him," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "He's hurt." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You know the rules. No pets. Absolutely no pets." "I know the rules, Frank. He just needs a place for the night. I'll figure it out tomorrow." The authority in my own voice surprised me. Frank looked from my determined face to the pathetic creature in my arms. He scowled, then surprisingly, he just shook his head and went back to mopping. "One night, Miller. And if management finds out, I never saw nothin'. Thanks, Frank." In the elevator, the reality of the situation began to truly sink in. What had I done? The dog lifted its head and looked at the glowing numbers ascending, its ears twitching with faint curiosity. My apartment had never felt so small. I set the dog down gently on the linoleum floor of the kitchenette. It immediately tried to stand, but its injured leg gave way and it collapsed with a small yelp. The sound was a knife in my heart. Okay, easy, I soothed. Let's see what we're dealing with. The next 2 hours were a blur of frantic, improvised care. I found an old towel and gently dried its fur as best I could. I filled a bowl with water, and it drank with a desperate, lapping urgency that made my throat tighten. I had no dog food, so I scrambled my last 2 eggs. It wolfed them down in seconds and then looked at me, hope flickering in its eyes for the first time. Then I looked at the leg. It was a nasty cut, infected and swollen. It needed a vet. Now, a wave of panic washed over me. It was after 7 p.m. on a Friday. Every vet in a 10-block radius would be closed. And I was broke until my next paycheck, which was still a week away. My credit cards were maxed out. This was a disaster. I called Sarah. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Hey, you, I was just about to call. Want to grab that new Thai place tonight? Her voice was bright, cheerful. The sound of a normal life. Sarah, I have a situation. What kind of situation? Did you get laid off? Her tone shifted to immediate concern. No, nothing like that. I found a dog. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You found a dog? Where? In an alley on my way home. He's really hurt, Sarah. His leg is bad. I need to find an emergency vet, but I trailed off, the shame of my financial state burning my cheeks. Jake, she said, her voice now careful, measured. What are you doing? You can't just bring a stray dog into your apartment. You have rules, and you're not exactly in a position to take on a pet. I know all of that. But you didn't see him. He was just waiting to die. I couldn't leave him there. My voice cracked. I just couldn't. Another long pause. Send me a picture. I took a picture of the dog, now lying on the towel, its head on its paws, watching me. I sent it. Her response was immediate. Oh, God, okay. There's an emergency animal hospital on 14th Street. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. I'll cover it. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked my eyes. Sarah, thank you. Just get him there, Jake. We'll talk after. The visit to the emergency vet was a whirlwind of bright lights, clinical smells, and worried faces. The vet, a kind woman with tired eyes, took one look at the dog and got him straight into an examination room. Sarah arrived just as they were taking him away. She looked from me, disheveled and smelling faintly of wet dog, to the closed door. You're serious about this, she said, not as a question. I am, I said, and the conviction in my own voice was as surprising to me as it was to her. An hour later, the vet came out to talk to us. The dog was dehydrated, malnourished, and had a deep laceration on his leg that was infected. He needed stitches, antibiotics, pain medication, and a special diet. The estimate she handed me was a number that made my stomach drop. Sarah, without a word, handed over her credit card. He's a lucky guy, the vet said. Another day or 2 out there, and the infection might have been septic. You saved his life. The words, saved his life, echoed in my head. I had never saved anything in my life. I coordinated data. They kept him overnight for observation and fluids. The apartment that night was eerily quiet. The silence felt different, though. It wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness. It was an anticipatory silence. I had created a problem. A big, complicated, expensive problem. But for the first time in years, I felt fully, vibrantly awake. The numbness was gone, replaced by a buzzing, anxious, but utterly alive feeling. The next morning, I went to pick him up. Sarah came with me. He looked a little better already. They had shaved the fur around his stitched-up leg, bathed him, and given him a dose of antibiotics. He still looked thin and frail, but the resignation in his eyes was gone, replaced by a tentative curiosity. He needs a name, Sarah said as we helped him into my apartment. He hobbled over to the water bowl and drank. I looked at him. He was a survivor. He had endured something I couldn't even imagine, and yet here he was, trusting us, starting over. Lucky, I said. We'll call him Lucky. Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile. It fits. That weekend was the beginning of my new life. I went to the pet store and, using the last of my cash, bought a bag of the recommended food, a bed, a leash, and a few toys. I cleaned my apartment from top to bottom, not out of obligation, but because Lucky deserved a clean, safe space. My focus shifted from my own internal misery to his external needs. When he needed to go out, I took him out, even at 3 a.m. When he was hungry, I measured his food carefully. When he whimpered in his sleep, I would sit by his bed and stroke his head until he settled. Sarah was a hesitant but willing partner in this new adventure. She helped me change his bandages, and I saw a new softness in her when she interacted with him. But the distance between us was still there, now centered on this new, massive variable in my life. "What's the long-term plan here, Jake?" she asked one evening, as Lucky slept contentedly at my feet. "The plan is he stays with me," I said, without hesitation. "And how? Your lease, your job, can you afford this? This isn't just a one-time vet bill. It's food, it's ongoing meds, it's everything. I'll figure it out," I said, and for the first time, I believed I could. The passive acceptance that had defined my life was gone. This was a problem that required action, and I was ready to act. The following Monday, I went to my manager and asked for a raise. I laid out my contributions over the past year, something I'd never had the confidence to do before. I was still terrified, my palms sweating, but I thought of Lucky's vet bills and stood my ground. To my astonishment, I got it. Not a huge one, but enough to make a difference. I then went to my landlord and pleaded my case, with Frank surprisingly backing me up, mentioning how I'd saved the poor thing's life. I agreed to pay a hefty pet deposit and an extra $50 a month in rent. It was approved. When I came home that night and told Lucky, "We get to stay, buddy," his tail thumped against the floor for the first time. It was a slow, weak thump, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The weeks turned into months. Lucky healed. His fur grew back thick and soft, a beautiful mix of tan and black. He gained weight, filling out into a strong, handsome dog. The haunted look in his eyes vanished completely, replaced by a goofy, loving devotion. He learned to trust, to play, to snuggle on the couch. And I changed too. The routine of my life was still there, the alarm clock, the commute, the cubicle, but its meaning had been completely transformed. It was no longer a meaningless loop. It was the structure that supported my life with Lucky. I started waking up before my alarm, excited to take him for his morning walk. The hollow ache in my chest was gone. It had been filled, not by a dog, but by a purpose. I was needed. I was responsible for this living, breathing creature who loved me unconditionally. My relationship with Sarah, however, couldn't withstand the shift. We had a quiet, sad conversation one night. She said, "You're a different person, Jake. And it's a good person. A better person. But the guy the first fell for, he's gone. This new Jake, his whole world revolves around that dog. And I feel like I'm on the outside." She was right. The part of me that had been capable of a easy, uncomplicated relationship had been the numb part, the part that was just going through the motions. Now that I was truly living, my priorities had realigned in a way that didn't include her in a central role. We parted as friends, with a genuine sadness but no bitterness. One sunny Saturday, about 6 months after I found him, Lucky and I were at the dog park. He was racing around with a pack of other dogs, his coat glossy in the sunlight, his body strong and healthy. He would periodically run back to me to check in, his tongue lolling out in a doggy grin, before bounding back into the fray. I sat on a bench, watching him, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow. The title of this moment, the title of this entire story. Something unexpected happened that day. I finally got what I needed. I had thought I needed a better job, more money, a more exciting relationship, a bigger apartment. I had been yearning for some external thing to fix my internal emptiness. But what I had truly needed was exactly what that broken dog in the alley had given me. I needed a reason to get out of bed that was bigger than myself. I needed to be pulled out of my own head and my own self-pity. I needed a responsibility that forced me to be brave, to speak up, to fight for something. I needed to experience unconditional love, and in doing so, learn how to give it. I needed to feel needed. Lucky trotted back over and dropped a slobbery tennis ball at my feet, his whole body wiggling with expectation. I picked it up and threw it as far as I could, watching him sprint after it, a blur of pure, unadulterated joy. He thought I had saved him that day in the rain. But as I sat there on that park bench, watching my best friend, I knew the truth with absolute certainty. He had saved me. The most unexpected thing that day wasn't finding a dog. It was finally finding myself.